So welcome everybody. We are going to get started on time tonight to be respectful of everybody's time. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Corey Murphy. I'm the EndoANP Executive Director. And tonight we're going to have just, kind of a casual conversation and helpful tips about specialization in general and kind of some of the benefits of it and why you're interested in that. And then also some details specifically about the EndoANP board certification exam and that process and why you might want to join. So our four panelists tonight are Dr. Alan Christensen, Dr. Leela Turner, Dr. Carrie Jones, and Dr. Allison Bonville, all of whom are FABNEs. If you guys have seen that, that's the term, that's how we say it, FABNEs. The Fellows of the American Board of Naturopathic Endocrinology, which is our board certification division of the EndoANP. So you might see that American Board of Naturopathic Oncology and wonder if that's a different entity. It's not, it's a DBA of EndoANP and kind of our board certification branch. So that's our panel for tonight. And I will just pass the floor right over to Alan to get us started. And then we will go through and kind of hit some highlights, and feel free to post questions as they come up, typing in the chat box. We'll also have an opportunity at the end for just an open Q&A if people want to, raise their hands or just unmute their lines. We'd love to hear from you and see you. So without further ado, Alan, I will put the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Corey, and thank everyone here for being with us and for your interest in this. So yeah, we're going to take just a few minutes and I'll talk through a bit about why specialization in general, reasons why one might do that. Dr. Carrie and Dr. Allison will speak through their experience on recently going through that process. I think that'll be really instructive. And we want to leave a fair amount of time for some of your top questions about all this that we might be able to help with. So that's it. I'll dive in, and shouldn't be more than 5-10 minutes about just why specialization in general. I connected with Corey back in 2014, I think it was, and we got going in earnest on this organization. And at the time, the ONC-ANP had been around, but the idea of specialization was not as well established. And I think there were more concerns then than there are at present. So some of these may not be really relevant, but one that was heard a lot before was, what about those who wish to do general practice still? I treat thyroid disease, but I also treat XYZ. And the short answer of that doesn't have to change. And even in terms of one's visibility, if you hold yourself out as a specialist in some area, the funny thing is that you often don't find less interest in your services in other areas. You might find the opposite. You often find people are asking to do things that some of which you would also do and some of which you might not. So you can certainly still do general practice. Another thing that was historically that came up was if being specialized and having an organization, if that would be infringing on other naturopaths from addressing those same issues. Is there some way by which us existing impedes other naturopaths who are not part of our group to care for patients with needs in endocrinology? And the short version of that is no, there certainly is not. There are no mandates, there's no sanctions, to use a term that's in the political world these days. There's nothing like that. There certainly are guidelines that you learn, and there's protocols that we talk through, and there's guidance and assistance that we all share, but there's nothing that inhibits anyone's practice if they're in or outside the organization. A point that Dr. Carey brought up, many think, if I'm already a licensed naturopath, am I not already board certified? And how am I really adding anything to that? Perhaps you can mention that a bit more in detail in a moment, but short version of that is, it ain't so. You're not board certified by dint of being licensed. So it does elevate your status in that extent. So those are some concerns that I've heard before. Others that you may think of, would be happy to cover under questions. So then we think about some benefits. And I'll talk about some personal ones and also benefits to the profession. So first thing I think of is really outcomes. And, that's what this is all about. End of the day is patient care, helping people feel better and live better lives and not have their health hold them back from all that. That's the whole point of why we do what we do. And as we focus, we get our depth of knowledge improves. You know, the stats are that there's somewhere around 6,000 to 7,000 new published papers on a daily basis. You know, we can't keep up with all of that. But the more we focus in an area, the better we can do for those who have those needs. And as time goes and as there are more people doing general practice, what happens is there are more people who have more complex needs who need help. So there will be those that have particular conditions to where a lot of common approaches are not good enough for them. And that's where specialists can really shine. And so that's where they can collaborate and have relationships with those who are doing more general practice. So yeah, the main thing I think is that we can just do a better job. We can set ourselves apart in that way. Other benefits, practice growth. You know, you can do better in terms of your overall practice and your financial status. So board certification, it's a great thing that gains more credibility. And as a general sense, it does, but also in a specific area. You're setting yourself out from, there's so many other people out there who have a list of 20 conditions they treat. You know, if a patient is choosing between a random functional medicine practitioner or someone who actually specializes in naturopathic endocrinology, and that's what their concern is, probably won't be a difficult decision for them. You know, the more narrow our focus is, the stronger our connection becomes for our marketing. And we also can do better in terms of our relationships with other practitioners. If we are board certified, our peers, especially the conventional peers, but even from all walks of medicine, they recognize that as such, and they respect us more for our expertise within our set of areas. So they're more comfortable referring to us, and they have more security that we'll be happy to refer back to them for general care. So it works well that way. And another point relative to practice growth is that the more we have a visible specialty status, the more mediagenic we become. So there's many benefits to being visible and being media friendly, but in many cases, the media will seek us out, and they'll always try to find someone that has a greater level of training within the area of interest. So it becomes much easier for media hits when we are specialized. A quick point about income. Corey had some slides up earlier, but the numbers on that are pretty straightforward. In the conventional and the chiropractic world, there was some data that I pulled up from a couple of years ago suggesting that specialists, their premium over generalists is about 166 to 180%, meaning that they're earning 70 to 80% more than the generalists are. In the naturopathic world, I found numbers saying that that range is a little broader. It's probably about 160 to 210%. So upper window of that means that specialists may have twice the earning potential that generalists do. So I hadn't thought about that way before, but yeah, check this out. So you guys worked pretty hard to go through school, you know, college, medical school, board exam testing. Imagine you could double your efforts with something as simple as the certification process. I mean, how cool would that? You don't have to go to, you don't have to like go through medical school again. You don't have to go through college again, but you could actually double your proceeds by doing that. That's a pretty awesome way to think about it. That's a heck of a shortcut. Okay. And last point, I think it really serves our profession. I really believe that the more we have strong, well-served specialty groups, the more our profession itself gains more credibility and more visibility. I do think that we see greater recognition by other industries, and we can do a better job with helping to share the things that we know we can do better with. We can become colleagues and peers and not so much just bystanders for that. So by doing so, you can also quite visibly add FABNY to your bio and CV. You can explain that to people. Websites, social media, you can make that visible, and you can have a distinction from that. So yeah, so specialty, we can do a better job for our patients. We can help our practices grow. We can not have to go through medical school again, but basically get that benefit. And we can serve our profession. So that was my quick spiel. I want to turn this over to Dr. Carrie Jones.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, everyone who is on and joining. Board certification is so important to me. My husband and I spent the last couple of days camping in a camper van, and we rushed home just so I could make this meeting because that's how I feel about talking about board certification. The reason I became board certified when it was first available was I had FOMO against those who were ONC certified. So all the fab knows, right? I was like, oncology is not my thing, but surely there's something. There's got to be something in endocrinology. And lo and behold, Dr. Nicole Ortiz called me one day and she said, "You're not going to believe this. We're forming a board about endocrinology. You've basically been in the endocrinology field since you graduated in 2005. Would you be interested?" And my perspective is a little bit different, I think, than the other three on here, because I am not in practice anymore. I had a very busy practice for a number of years. And now I'm predominantly in consulting and education. And what I have found, because I consult with designations all over the board, I consult with health coaches, I consult with chiropractors, NDs, but also MDs. And in the MD world, where board certification is big, they have a lot of FOMO around what I have. So as a prime example, I routinely consult on hormone labs. One doctor she's double board certified. She's an internist and gastroenterologist, and a different doctor is board certified and she's an interventional cardiologist. And both of them were like, "What's FABNY?" I was like, "Oh, I'm board certified in naturopathic endocrinology." And they thought that was the coolest thing. And they wanted to know if they could do it too. And I was like, "Nope, sorry about that. You have your own board. This is our board." And so even just little things like that, as I'm educating, as I'm getting asked to speak, as I'm on stages, as companies are hiring me to consult, as companies are hiring me to do a webinar for them, having the FABNY on there, or when they introduce me in the bio and they're like, "And she's a fellow of the Board of Naturopathic Endocrinology," they're like, "Oh my gosh, that's so cool. I didn't know that was a thing," and way to go. So it just sort of adds that extra bit of credibility. And as Dr. Allen said, you've studied this, some of you have been in this field for a long time in endocrinology and, hormones, and it just adds that like cherry on top, that obviously organic, non-toxic cherry on top to everything, to say that you're board certified in it. And so I wanted to give that little bit of perspective from somebody who's not in practice, but does deal a lot in the allopathic world, in functional medicine, either through writing or on webinars or on stages, in conferences across the world, because it does get noticed a lot. And I think that's important. And then the other thing that Dr. Allen touched on was well, I've already passed my boards to become a doctor, to get ND and get a state license. Doesn't that mean I'm board certified? And it doesn't, as he said, it doesn't. And so there's definitely a misconception for a lot of NDs who feel, "Well, I passed my board, so clearly I can say I'm board certified." But to be board certified, you have to be it's these specialty boards that we're talking about, whether it's in the MD world or the DO world, or even, the chiropractic world or our world. It's these separate specialist boards where you have to study hard, pass a test, and then you get certified in it. And so by having a FABNY, you really will be able to say that you are board certified, and can explain that either to people who hire you, people you consult with, whether it's other practitioners, it's your patients. It really does mean a lot. And so through my process, which I know Allison's the Dr. Ali is the newer FABNY, but it's a process. It's definitely not paid, just, pay to play, pay some money and get a certification. You submit cases, and there's serious studying that has to go with it. And it's the real deal, which I appreciate. I feel like I've earned my stripes. I've earned my certification. Turns out I knew what I was talking about because I passed the test. And now here I am. I was along with Leila and Ellen, one of the very first board certified. And so that's sort of my story. That's why I do it. I wanted to give the perspective of somebody who's not seeing patients, but it's heavily talked about when I'm approached to speak or to write on the behalf of, other groups, organizations, or doctors. And it's become a big deal. And there are only a few of us out there. So imagine when our board gets bigger, better, and stronger, just way to represent the naturopathic community. So that's my story. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Allison.
Thanks, Carrie. I can remember when I found out about this board certification, and it was from you, Dr. Jones. I was like, "Oh, she's posting something on Instagram. What is this? This is I can get board certified." The words board and fellow to me was like, yes, it's like, okay, this is going to be exciting. And so I found out about the test, and then I think the test was upcoming in like not a very long time. I found out in January and it was going to be in May. And Corey, the lovely executive director of this board, helped me kind of figure out very quickly what I needed to do. And I wrote 6 cases, and I think that's the requirement. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure 5 cases. Okay. And I, have done endocrinology and hormonal health pretty much in my practice. That's one of the things I've really loved to do all along, and also some general practice as well. So I was able to wrangle those cases pretty quickly. I think I was able to go back through my practice and kind of just look at some of even my most recent patients and write them up. And I enjoyed that process. And it was kind of like, okay, a nice review of my patient charts. And then I started studying, and they send you a nice long list of references to look at. I think there was like 200 references or more. I did read almost every single one, almost, just because that's my personality type. And so it was hard. I kind of joked before we got on this call that I got behind on my charting because I was so busy and into studying. But when it was over after the test, I kind of missed it, because there's something really exciting and fun about reading journal articles and other references on the topics that you're really interested in. And even though I've been in practice since 2009, and I learned so much. It was exciting. It took my base knowledge of, hormonal health and endocrinology to such a different level. And even today, I was with a patient and I was like, oh yeah, congenital adrenal hyperplasia. Yeah. I know every single test for that. And this is what we need to do. And it was just right there. And before I knew it, but it wasn't as solid and I didn't feel as sure. And it just felt really nice. So it was definitely worth it. It was definitely been worth it for me to kind of keep it going, up level the level of education. And even now my colleagues will come to me and they'll be like, oh, you have the board certification, and they'll ask me questions, and I'm able to really point them in the right direction or give them more information. So it's been a really beautiful process that I've appreciated. And I only have been board certified since June, and I feel like it's already paid for itself. So yeah.
That's awesome.
Awesome. Well, Leela, if you and I want to tag team the next part, if you want to maybe talk about
Sure.
a little bit of the history of like the creation of the process of the exam, and then I'll walk everybody through like what actually are kind of the steps, and then we'll do some Q&A.
Yep. So I joined the board, gosh, I think it's been 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. I can't quite remember. But at the time, board certification was this like big project that we kept referencing and we kept delaying.
Someday
we were going to do it. And it was like, yeah, of course we're going to do that. But getting it off the ground was a massive project. It really was. And I mean, honestly, I'm just proud of us for doing it. It was an accomplishment. We, at the time, the board, we all did. So we made the blueprint, which was fun and easy because it's like, what are we going to do? And then we picked up we separated it out in percentages and we're weighing things. And then we divvied it all up. And then we all had a lot of questions to write. We each wrote somewhere between 40 and 80 questions. And then we all got together. We actually got together in person and we took our own exam and we hashed out all the questions. We threw a bunch away and we basically all took our own exam and refined it. We narrowed it down to 300 final questions. And then those have been the questions that have been rotating through each time we offer the exam. And we're going to be writing more questions soon. And especially now that we have more FABMEs, we're going to be seeking some more exam question writers to help us add to the database. Luckily, we'd been through, Corey has experience with setting this process up because she helped EndoANP set this up. And so we had a lot of resources to help us in terms of figuring out like the testing exam people and who do we use. We actually had to change that at one point. But all of that has been fleshed out, and we'll be adding to the database. I hated writing exam questions. It was torture for me, to be totally honest. But I also, I loved taking the test. That was so much fun. I don't know what it was. It was like, you got to like, you were thinking, writing the questions, I feel like is almost harder because you have to have distractors, and the distractors can't be too close. So creating the exam was a whole experience that I feel like helped us refine our knowledge. It also was a really good opportunity for all of us to ask each other, well, how do you do it? What do you do? What resources do you do? How do I do it? And it was helpful, I think, for us to, I think one of the questions is, should I do this exam and should I become board certified? What if I practice differently than the other naturopath, right? Because there's this spectrum of how naturopaths practice. I mean, even what's the ideal TSH? There's this like spectrum, even within the naturopathic community. And I think rather than, well, this is how I'm going to do it because this is how I've been doing it for 15 years. And this is how I was either taught or my mentors taught me, rather than think that the way I do it is the right way to do it. I want to know, how is everyone else doing it? And what's their reasoning and what are their resources? Because I'd rather feel more confident in what I am doing. And I'd also rather be informed if there's a study that I didn't know about that I should know about. I've learned a lot. And, the reason I was very mixed on whether or not I wanted to specialize, because I am a naturopath and I think it's important to stay connected to my naturopathic roots. And yes, I treat the gut too. And yes, I look at the whole picture. And yes, I do lifestyle counseling, even though I say I specialize in naturopathic endocrinology. But being able to know that I know a field so well, and I still feel like there's more to learn, but I feel like being able to rely on the information that we know, it's huge. It helps me in practice. I noticed that it changed how I practice. It changed how I would make decisions with patients when we created the exam and when we took it and when we launched it. I think there's some fear-based about all of our specialization boards splintering the naturopathic community. I have that fear, and I wanted to voice that fear because I think it is important for us. Well, now should I join the Gastroenterology Association? And now do I need to go do, every other board certification I am if I also treat somebody with Crohn's disease? And no, I don't think you have to. I think that we could all probably pick a area that we feel that we are more aligned with. And it doesn't mean you don't still treat those other things. I still treat colds and flus. My practice is women's medicine focused, but that just means I treat 51% of the population. What I'm treating them to help them with is your area of expertise. So I kind of merged my why with the how there, Corey, but that was kind of the development of the exam and why I chose to do it. I chose to do it because I wanted to align myself with other like-minded people that love hormones and that want to hold ourselves to a higher standard. That's why I do it. That's why I did it.
I threw in one quick point, Corey, before you take over again.
Yeah.
So something I thought of that just wanted to mention to people, within endocrinology, you probably have become aware that many of us actually sub-specialize. We have, Leela mentioned women's health. I've focused quite deeply on thyroid disease. And so a fair question that has come up has been, or for example, we've had Dr. Amatma who focuses on infertility. What about these things that are outside of your subspecialty. How well would you do on the exam? How big of a barrier is this? And we've put a ton of thought into that. That was a lot of the discussions we had during the exam as well, is that how would these questions land on someone to where that could be within their specialty, but it may not be their subspecialty. So please know that we did take that into account, and that if your understanding of naturopathic endocrinology is at an operative level, you'll do fine with things, even if they're not your subspecialty. And I say that having massive ignorance outside of my subspecialty.
Yeah. And actually, I'm glad you said that, Alan, because that actually perfectly transitions into one of the things I was going to say to kind of transition about, like, what is the actual process and the requirements and what does this look like? The way that I'm going to say this is going to sound kind of funny, but the way that the board certification systems are made up in conventional and naturopathic medicine is what is the minimally competent level of which a person should be considered board certified. So to Alan's point, and when Lila's talking about when the questions were written, Alan wrote a lot of the thyroid questions because that's his subspecialty, and Omatma wrote a lot of the ovary questions because that's her subspecialty. But then when we took the exam, everybody together, it was kind of like, is this too specific, right? Did Omatma put something in that was so specific in this area that not a general person wouldn't know that? And same thing with Alan. Was there some questions in there that were so detailed in thyroid that the general practitioner doesn't need to know that level of detail? So yes, that's a really good point, Alan. I'm so glad you brought that up because that kind of dinged with me as well. So what's the process? So I should also say, if this wasn't clear enough, one of the reasons why we're having this is you will all be getting an email in the next week, probably tomorrow, because we are launching our next round of board certification, our next round of applications, which happens over this fall period. The exam will be held next spring. And so with the application, you'll see the full timeline of when cases are due and when the steps are. But basically, the application itself is a list of requirements, licensed ND, graduated from a CNME accredited school, all kind of that basic stuff that everybody has if you're an active member of the EndoANP already. You do need to write up, as Allison mentioned, you do need to write up 5 cases. And we're looking for kind of a diverse range of endocrinology conditions. So not just 5 fertility or 5 menopause, the idea of trying to see some well-rounded. And just a little tip for folks. Sometimes I think when people write up cases, they like to think of oh, this extraordinary responder or this really unique rare condition that we got. That would be an awesome case report. And every now and then that might be a great fit, but really we're trying to understand this basic, minimum competency. So we want to, as reviewers, understand that the bread and butter, right? And your basics. So just a little helpful tip when you're picking your cases is don't feel that you need to wow people with some, extraordinary condition. Just show us what you're talking about. So everybody needs to write up 5 cases. You have to have, the application should be right in front of me, but it's not. You have to have, I don't know if it's 30 or 50, so I will double check, but hours of CE over the last 5 years that are related to endocrinology. And so most of you, obviously, with licensing requirements, have to keep up that level of CE already. And then what happens is basically those cases are submitted to me directly. I blind all of them. So none of the reviewers know whose cases they're reviewing. They have a whole case rubrics of what they're looking for in the plans and how they're scoring them. And that outline of how cases are scored and what we're looking for is included in the application. So you can understand kind of how things are being scored and what the passing policy is. So those are blinded, scored. Each case has at least 3 sets of eyes on it. So it's not just one person making your determination. It's a group reviewing your applications. Those scores get finalized. We let applicants know if they're approved to sit for the test. Then at that moment, then they're given the blueprint, which is the outline of kind of the topics covered and the percentage that each category is given to, as well as a list of references. And those references were used to create the exam items. if your personality type is to read every single one of those articles, you are more than welcome to do that. But I would not say that that is essential to pass the exam, right? We just want to provide all of those to people. But if this is what you're doing and this is truly the area you're specialized in, you should be able to see that list of references and kind of pinpoint out the areas that really well and you feel like you have down, and then the areas that you might be weaker in the blueprint, and then really focus in on those article areas. I will point out that for some people, if your cases don't pass initially, we do have you'll see this whole policy, but we do have the potential for you to resubmit cases in that cycle if they scored within a range. And so you'll get a notification that, these 2 cases passed and these 3 didn't. And here's, with some kind of notes on, the areas that were weaker, and you're given a timeline to resubmit, and you can resubmit those and go through the process again. I do want to highlight, if you ever are not approved to submit initially, or in that round, everybody is encouraged and welcome to submit the next time around, right? You're not banned or put on any sort of penalty of not being able to sit for the exam for X amount of cycles or anything like that. So then the exam itself, which will, like I said, be held next May, is a 200 question multiple choice exam that follows the outline of the blueprint. We have tried to make this, it definitely covers basic sciences, but we definitely try to make things clinically relevant as well. So they're not just, did you read this particular article and happen to remember this particular percentage, from this particular author? There's a handful of percentage questions around, but again, the idea is not to trip you up. Was it 3 or 5 or 7 or 10%, right? That's not the goal of this exam, is not to trip people up. And so then the exam has happened. Again, those scores all get processed and they're blinded. And then the board actually does, again, another blinded process of a process called a cut score, where they basically take the test again and they rank the difficulty of each question. So they'll look at a question and decide, that's a really easy question. And so 90% of people should get that question right. Or that actually on, further review is a very difficult question, either because of the content, or maybe it was worded poorly, or there was a really bad distractor that therefore made it a really difficult question. So then maybe we determine only like 40% of people might get this right. And so there's a whole cut score process, but the end result of that cut score process, there's a final score at the end of that when you run all the numbers and do all the equations, and that becomes the passing score for the exam. And that number never changes. So you're not graded on a curve. Everybody could fail, everybody could pass. It's just that independent process of the cut score determines what is the passing score for the exam. People take the exam, they get their scores, we cross-reference it. And I will say that the final step, just so people know kind of the whole process, is we do a post-exam analysis just to make sure things are in line. So if we keyed the correct answer as A and everybody answered D, right? That question gets flagged for us as a board to take a look at that after the exam. And that might result in us, giving everybody a free point for that, or determining that, D is a correct answer. And so people might get some additional points to their scores in the post-exam analysis, because we review things and determine, based on the results. Again, not knowing any of the individual names, just the numbers and how the scores came across, if things need to be adjusted. So that's in a real nutshell, and maybe too much detail for some of you, but I wanted to give everybody the whole picture so they know that this is, a real process and a legitimate thing. And all of those steps along the way are done in line with best testing practices, which is why we do all of those, because as Carrie said, one of the things about having this board certification designation is being able to stand toe to toe with our conventional counterparts or other people. And in order to do that, we also need to make sure that we've set up a process that is legitimate and defensible and on par with how others are performing in the board certification world. And so that's why we've kind of set up all of these steps and checks and balances, and why we administer our exam through the agency that we do, that's approved by the Institute of Credentialing Excellence. So yeah, so that is kind of the process and the requirements. You need to have been in practice for a certain amount of years and see a certain amount of patient contacts. But again, that'll all be in the application that I'll send out to all of you. But I think that's all that I have to kind of say about that. I probably rambled on too much. Anybody else on the panel want to say anything else before we open it up to Q&A? No? Okay. We would love to take your guys' questions. You can type questions in the chat, or this is an open meeting thing. So you guys all have control over your mute and unmute and video and not video. So feel free to ask. Jennifer, that's a great question. I don't know if everybody can see that or if only I can see that. Are there sample cases we can see? Yes, we will absolutely be providing a sample case. We can absolutely provide a sample case, a blinded sample case, along with the application, which I'm trying to remember if we did that last cycle.
You did.
Yeah, we did. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, I think we did. Great.
I think I even got more than one sample case. So here's a couple like different examples of what you can do.
Yeah, because it's definitely, people present cases in very different ways, and we don't have a super rigid like format of how you have to present them. But yeah, I think you're right. We gave a couple different examples so people could see more of like, if I'm remembering correctly now, like more of like a narrative version of a case report, and then more of kind of like a chart version of a case report. And both are fine and well as long as we understand your clinical reasoning and why you're doing what you're doing or why you're not doing what you're not doing.
Can I comment on a couple of the cases, Corey?
Yes.
So just to also throw out there, when we are reviewing applications, we have a lot to read. And so anything that you can do that makes it pretty, makes it easier on our eyes to read all 270 pages of the applications and the cases. So on that point, it doesn't have to be in paragraph form, but bullets are really nice. And another thing on that is, when you guys are thinking about what cases to present, we want to see your bread and butter of your generic endocrine cases. We don't want to see the really bizarre, it's not like you have to have zebras and you have to impress us. We're not trying to, it's not like some competition case thing. It's your simple, straightforward. We want to see your clinical thinking. We want to see that what your basic thought process is. And then also don't pick cases where you're picking all the same condition. We want to see a variety of thought process on those cases. And I know that those guidelines are kind of written up somewhere, but I just figured I would voice them here too.
Yeah, that's really good to voice. Great.
Easy one from Alyssa about
yep.
just years in practice. So yeah, five years in practice, 2-year residency in the field does work in lieu of that, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then that's a really good question on, is this based on when the cases are due in the fall or when you take the exam in May? That's a really good question that, to be fair, I'm not sure that the EndoANP board has actually officially made a policy on, but assuming they would follow.
It's when you take the exam.
Yeah. Assuming you would follow suit with the way that ONC-ANP and the other groups do it. Yeah. You can apply if you're going to hit the 5 years in the spring. You can apply for it now as long as you've met the requirements by the exam time. You're fine.
If you apply for a big race, your age group is your age at the time of the race, not the time of you apply. So.
Oh yeah, there you go. Perfect. Do you run the exam every year? Really good question. So yes, so currently we are on an annual cycle. So a fall application period with a spring offering of the exam. I anticipate we will continue that. I will say that while this decision hasn't been made, there is a chance that we might switch to an 18 or 24 month cycle. And the reason for that would just be to get a bigger cohort of people sitting at one time. It's a lot of energy that goes into the creation of a new exam because each cycle we have to refresh about 30% of the exam. So about 60 questions and, all those steps I talked about are quite labor intensive. And when we have small groups sit for them, it's a lot of work. And also when we do that post-exam analysis with a smaller group, things aren't as statistically significant. And so that decision has not been made, but I do want to throw that out there. And if we ever were to switch to that, we would definitely do it in a way where we voiced, like, let's say next fall, we say, hey, we're starting up the 2022-2023 exam cycle. This is going to be the last, or like our next offering after this one won't be for 2 years. Like when and if we make that decision to space out the exam, we will make sure to do it where we're announcing it before an exam is happening. So we're not just saying, okay, an exam happened and, we decided we're going to wait for a few years to have another exam. So just so people know, the space out is a possibility, but we'll make sure everybody has well advanced knowledge and has the opportunity to sit for a next offering before we take a gap.
But if it is going to be another year, even, we're talking about more than a year on the calendar. We're talking about like 2024 or something. So if you're interested, now's the good
Right.
time.
Yeah. Great. Any other questions? And again, people can feel free to unmute and verbally ask them as well.
There's got to be some questions, you guys. Come on, somebody has to have one.
We must have just explained it so thoroughly.
I don't think that's possible.
Or scared everybody away.
Maybe that's what happened.
We should comment on how the exam, it was a virtual exam.
I was just going to say that,
Do
explaining.
you guys want to just say how the experience was taking the exam virtually?
My experience, it's really serious. You have, like, it's through an independent testing center. I mean, it's virtual, but you have to log in, you talk with a testing host.
Proctor.
Proctor, thank you, can think of the word. And you have to show, when I did it, I had to show her video of what my desk looked like, what was behind me, what was under the desk, which is really hard for me because where I'm sitting right here, it's like, it looks great, but like my actual desk is kind of a tornado mess. And so you had to clear all that out, clear everything under my desk, which is mostly, honestly, funny enough, dog stuff, because that's where he lays. And then because they're obviously cheating. And then they let you know that they like watch your eye movement. And if you take too long, you can't take breaks, you can't go to the bathroom, like make sure you've water and you've gone to the bathroom. So it's a no joke. It's just like being in a testing center per se, where you wouldn't be allowed to get up, move around, take your time. It's you do it at your desk, but it's the proctor is serious. But you do have a lot of time to get through all 300 questions. And,
200.
Or 200 questions. And because it's at your own desk or wherever you choose to do it, it is fairly comfortable, as opposed to, for those people who get test anxiety, going to a testing center, being in a big room that you don't know, that's too hot or too cold or too whatever. It's much nicer. It's a lot. Once you get the proctor to like do the video around, for me, it was great. It was like, then you just start and finish the test.
How long did it take you both?
I'm a quick test taker. So I want to say it took me, for the 200 questions, I think you have 4 hours, right? I want to say it took me about half that. And you can go back and read like your answers. That's an option. And you can also choose anytime, 24 days, like once the testing window is open, which I found to be really convenient, you can choose your date and time, and you don't have to make a reservation. You basically log in, and they are like right there ready to help you. And you do have to have your phone and your computer, because you set up your phone, and your phone, I think they watch you through your phone. And then you also share your screen. There's kind of a whole, they're keeping an eye on you. They were really nice to me. I had a cold at the time, and I begged them for my tissues and my little essential oil, and they let me do that. So it was super easy. Yeah.
I forgot about the share screen. Yeah. So you can't cheat. So you can't put anything on your desk, and you can't feel like, I'll just switch between windows and screen. They totally monitor your screen for the time being, and then you can disconnect all that.
And they do want you to be in a like pretty strong Wi-Fi area. I would say that's something that they do talk a little bit about too, is to make sure you have a really strong connection.
Definitely. And what's nice is we had already pivoted virtual before COVID, like we had already switched to virtual. And so then when COVID happened, it was like, oh, great. Well, we're already set up for that. And oddly, even though it seems funny that you could be taking your exam in your pajamas in your bedroom, it's actually more of a secure exam because, to Carrie's point, like when you're in a testing center, I mean, there's like a proctor, but they're usually like in a room, like to the side, and there's like 20 people taking 20 different exams on 20 different computers. Like nobody's actually watching you directly, typically. So this is, even though it seems like it's maybe not as professional because you can just do it wherever, you're not going to a place, it's actually a lot more test secure and a lot more stringent. Great. Well, just for the people, I know several people have hopped off already. Oh no, we still have it pretty good. I would love to see in the chat group, if people are like, maybe just put your name down or like thumbs up. Like if people are thinking that they might apply this cycle, I would love to just kind of get, you know, not necessarily a list of names, almost just like a, you know, number thing. And I'll be following up not only with all of you specifically on this webinar tonight, but of course, all of our members to launch the application. But I always like to specifically follow up with people who, you know, want to make sure that they're on the list and they're getting all the information. So feel free to put the thumbs up and you're planning on doing it, or, you know, and people can, of course, always follow up with, you know, the EndoANP@gmail.com email if you have follow-up questions after this, or if you're listening to this recording on the EndoANP website and the archive version of this, and so you're not able to ask live questions, send me an email, put it on our EndoANP members chat on Facebook. Hopefully everybody is taking advantage of that member benefit. If not, go to Facebook and type in EndoANP members and you'll get that group to pop up. It's a private group, so if you're not in it, you'll have to press invite and we'll let you in, and you can always ask board certification questions there as well. Anything else from questions from our audience or from our panel? All right.
I think everyone should do it.
Sure.
Those of you who are on the fence, we're going to push you off the fence.
Get off the fence. This is
you
your
can
sign.
do it.
Oh, actually,
can do
I'm
it.
so glad you said that. The one last thing, which actually is an important thing to do that I didn't mention, but I think it is worth mentioning, I mean, you'll see it on the application, is fees, right? So like on the fence, and because part of what I was just going to say is just take it, even if you're not sure. Something that is important to know. So there's an application fee and then there's a testing fee. And so the application fee is $250. And then the testing fee kind of flexes a little bit depending on how many people sit for the test, but it's usually right around the $300 mark. So you are looking at about a $500 investment, but your certification is good for 10 years. So you don't have to recertify for 10 years. So, you know, if $500 seems a lot all at once, just remember that's really more like $50 for the next 10 years for your board certification license. And I do want to also say that if you are approved to sit for the exam, you know, your application is approved, but you don't pass the exam, you can absolutely sit for the exam as many, sit for the exam the next cycle. You don't have to reapply. You're already approved to sit for the exam. And so you don't have to pay another application fee. You just need to pay another testing fee. So that's just a couple logistical things that I forgot to mention. But of course, everybody, that's always a decision-making point for people too. So I want to clarify that as well.
One of the questions about the total patient hours makes it feel out of reach for me. Definitely connect with Corey about that to make sure, because I would hate for you to think it's out of reach and then Corey does the math and she's like, no, actually it's totally in reach. You should do it.
Yeah, it usually can
be. That happen.
Depending on how your practice is set up, right? So for people who are in practice part-time, let's say like 2 days a week or 3 days a week, that number can take like more than 5 years to reach. You know what I mean? But if you're in like that, the math of that patient contact was based on, if you're seeing patients, I can't remember the exact equation, but I think it was kind of like, if you're doing 25 hours of patient contacts a week, and you work 48 weeks a year and over 5 years, I mean, there was a math that was something like that, to kind of get the patient contacts, and then like 70 or 60% of that number if you're seeing the majority of your patients with that condition. So, but yes, definitely follow up with me if any of you have, when you get the application, if any of you are concerned about that or need to figure out if that's a sticking point, we can definitely talk about it and see how we can make that work, or when you would qualify for sure. Okay. All right. Well,
thanks for
everybody,
coming,
thank you so
everybody.
much for joining us tonight, and our panelists for sharing their information. And we look forward to having a great new cohort of Fabinees next spring. And like I
Yay.
said, stay tuned for that application to come out to you this week.
Thanks,
Good
everyone.
night, everyone.
Yay.
Good night, everybody.
Thank
Allison,
you.
Bye-bye.
I sent you a note in the chat, Allison, about that service.
I saw that. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Bye-bye.
Good night,
Honored to be a
everybody.
part of this group, you guys. It's really nice. Thank you.
Bye, Allison.
Bye, Ellie.
Bye.